This is the DLR Cast, the essential podcast for fans of Diamond David Lee Roth. All right, folks, what's happening? Once again, you've got the DLR Cast, the only podcast by and for fans of the mighty, the retired one, the Diamond one, David Lee Roth. As always, I'm Steve, along with my good friend and confidant and man bon vivant around town. I'm not even sure what that means, or if I'm talking French. Live from the left coast, it's Darren Paltrowitz. What's happening, Darren?
Steve, always a pleasure. I did not plan on being sick for this long, so apologies for my voice. But hey, it is always a pleasure to be connecting with you on the air, off the air, etc. It's always a pleasure to not know what the hell is going on with David Lee Roth, which this episode is yet another edition of.
I guess, however, partially because we'll get into this in a second. We have got one of the best interviews you've ever done. One of the best interviews I think we've had so far on the DLR Cast. In fact, I believe you can call this one a Roth exclusive, as far as someone who, but hey, listen, if you're listening to this by now, you've read the show notes, but we're very excited to talk about this interview shortly. However, it's 2 weeks since the cancellation of and all the zaniness that went on during the Las Vegas residency that wasn't. In that time, Sammy Hagar has announced a residency, and the young rocker in me that used to get poked by friends all the time in the Sammy versus Dave wars, I guess, back in the late 80s when we all was when I used to let this shit get to me. Those friends back in the day would have gone to me today or back then and said, well, Sammy can do a residency in Vegas. Why can't Dave? And that's a good question, because that's what's happening. Sammy's got one all rolled up and ready to go. And as far as we know, we'll never hear Dave sing live again.
Well, before we endlessly celebrate Sammy's praises, I do have to provide a little bit of an update where a fifth publicist from Sammy's camp has done the following to me. Would you like to talk with Sammy next week? Yes. Ghost.
Oh, jeez.
A fifth one. And like 3 days after that, they announced the residency. And the bottom of the residency press release is, and for interviews with Sammy, please contact blank. So I reached out and went, hey, so just to let you know, ghosting. So I think with Sammy, my questions still persist about how much of the everyman, I'm out for all you guys, I love you guys, how much of that is actually real?
Well, I always like to try to give the benefit of the doubt. Let's say the schedule is very busy. There could be a guave emergency down in Cabo Wabo, given the weather. Who the hell knows? Yeah. We'll think it's above board. He's got a ton of requests. I get that. I was thinking a lot of something else too recently that bums me out. And again, it's all speculation. Let's assume the cancellation was announced. Dave announced that it was COVID related. People recover from COVID. We've heard nothing otherwise. And what bums me out a little bit is that if there's easier or a more efficient way to tour, to do live shows in Vegas, it doesn't exist, because it is for an older veteran rocker. It is about as good of a touring or performance situation as you're going to get. You're not in and out of planes or buses. You're not going from town to town. You're stationary for how many days you need to be during the residency, presumably in a great suite, or you're a 90-minute private jet flight away. You can go home every night. It's the equivalent of Billy Joel flying back and forth from Montauk to Madison Square Garden once a month for 2 years straight in a helicopter. I mean, it's the same venue. Presumably any sound bugaboos are going to work out, climate issues. It is about as good and, for lack of a better word, easy of a live event situation as you can get as far as music, right? For an older rocker.
Totally agree. This was a music business lesson I learned in the early 2000s from an old boss of mine when he was explaining to me why Foreigner plays so many casinos. And they're treated super well. They're paid super well. The food is good. And
there's some standardization, right? The rooms are pretty much the same.
Yeah. And you have your room, you go downstairs, you play, and you go back up to your room.
You're not dealing with sound craziness or an opening band craziness or anything like that might happen. It's one gig, 75 minutes, you're in and out, done.
Yeah. And generally speaking, the hotel provides the catering, the drinks, your room, the place to park the bus. If you're playing a gig in New York City, oftentimes these days you can't park the tour bus in New York City. You have to park it in Jersey. So then that's more salaries and more expenses. When you play the casino, if you're in the backing band, you still get your per diem. They give you your 40 or 50 bucks a day, but you're being fed. So that's just money that goes in your pocket.
Right.
Everyone loves playing casinos. So you're right. It doesn't get much sweeter than that.
Vegas, where it's one city, one place, that's it.
Yeah.
There's no wear and tear traveling on the body, right? No wear and tear on crew as much, nowhere near as much. So the fact that this didn't get done, one, bums me out. Two, just it makes me scratch my head even more. What else don't we know? Why didn't this happen? I mean, if you could sing on a Thursday and it's canceled, why is it canceled for good instead of 3 Thursdays from now?
Yes, all valid points. And without naming names, certain people who are within the current Roth administration are not afraid to talk with me, and I have established there is an NDA in place. So I believe that is why they are where they are right now, where only 1 or 2 people are allowed to speak for what's going on. And those 1 or 2 people are going, I don't feel like speaking. And that's why we are where we are right now.
So I guess for right now, we got nothing but that.
Nothing but yeah, as people say.
Or not, or yet. Nothing but yet.
Yeah, nothing but yet. Yeah.
Or as the late, great Billy Preston once opined, nothing but nothing means nothing.
Yeah. These people who are within his organization, they're not stopping working. They are not on the physical mend. They may or may not have posted social media photos from the last 3 to 4 weeks. They exist, but I don't think that they want to lose their jobs in case
something changes.
This does happen. So I think that's why they're being good employees and not saying anything.
And let's face it, if you like who you're working for, if it's a really good gig, regardless, you're not going to go badmouth the boss or the company, right? I mean, you want to stay employed or you want to stay somehow connected for future employment, that sort of thing. Totally get it. Wouldn't expect anything else, and I can't say I wouldn't be in the same exact situation. I mean, I wouldn't do the same thing if I was in the exact situation.
But that's a totally different answer than we don't know who's sick. We don't know what's going on. Is everyone okay?
Right.
We're fine.
Right. Interesting. Well, who knows? You never know if your phone will ring, who will pick up in a garbled voice or something.
Well, I did. I don't think I told you this off mic. I basically sent another message to Team Roth going, hey, I'd be interested in talking to Dave. I don't, I will give creative control on this. I will only talk about the topics that he wants to talk about. We don't have to go anything controversial. It will go in these many places. Radio silence.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I don't think again, as always, Tamari could pop up somewhere else. I got a feeling it's going to be my hunch outside of artwork and maybe another song or two is that it's going to be radio silence. However, when I was listening back to the recent episode, you had said a source of yours mentioned that there could be all sorts of things happening, a lot of activity. It just might not. It's just probably not going to include musical activity.
Yeah. Or
maybe that's just live musical activity.
There's people who are saying, yeah, he's never singing live again. But I think I'd mentioned in an episode, a couple episodes ago, that there's a mysterious 2004-2005 Vegas residency that was supposed to happen. Did we talk about that?
You mentioned it, I think. We might have got a little sidetracked, but I remember you mentioning it briefly.
Yes. It was supposed to be produced by the people who produced the Crazy Girls show review and different burlesque kind of things. And
Right. Now, yeah.
They leaked the news of that to one of the Vegas newspapers before the ink was dry. And then they did like a second leak where they're like, no, it's a totally new show and it doesn't have the strippers in it and it's more of a comedy thing. And then it went away. And I made contact with the two different people who were producing it. And one of them, to put it nicely, was like, yeah, I haven't worked with her in 15 years. And then the other one's like, I don't want to talk about it. So, the more I delve into the Dave world, the more projects we see that he kind of starts and stops. And sometimes details get out there. I was talking to another unnamed source the other day, and basically a lot of stuff was supposed to happen during that Van Halen run between 2007 and 2015 that not all four members of the band agreed on. And details of those things have not really emerged publicly. So it just makes me think that Dave, every day of the week, is working on something, but maybe it doesn't happen and no one's at liberty to leak the details. And they remain, what was the Roth mystery term we had?
Oh, now I'm spacing on it.
S3s. I don't know. Whatever it is.
We had a good word there. Damn it.
Whatever it is. I just think that you continue to have to speak to like 100 people and compare all their notes and figure out what's happening. Hence why we know so little about so many different things. And if anything's going to happen ever again, if Roth does come out and do an interview, where do you think it is? Do you think it's Rogan?
He's done Rogan before. He's done Maron before. Is there another podcast that maybe he'd want to suddenly show up on? Somebody may not be, nowhere near as big as those two, let's say. Or does he go to where he's comfortable? I mean, that assumes that Rogan or Maron would have him on right away again either. It's been relatively, if those guys are bombarded for guests, they got busy schedules, right? I mean, maybe they just go, call us in 6 months.
Yeah. Have you been seeing a lot of the people posting like, oh, the sucks that the Roth residency was canceled. I was supposed to go. Have you seen some of those posts?
Very few.
There was a Pauly Shore one.
That's what you're getting at.
There was, I texted with somebody who works with Stephen Piercy, and she said he was supposed to go along with Niels Lozauer. So he was slated to go. What was another good one of somebody? Eddie Trunk said that he was supposed to go to a specific show, and I forget who it was with.
I think lots of people ended up, ready to go, especially from the rock cognoscenti, let's say. But yeah, I was just thinking too, something else that we were talking about as well, and that is, now that I'm thinking of it, we were digging into this a lot in the last episode, and that is nobody has seen Dave in person or anything in like since what did we figure out since
the VMA Awards? The
VMA Awards September. There's been the photos for the posters and everything were old, right? Mm-hmm. We're older photos, right? For the posters, for the merch, what we've seen around and the press stuff, and he's certainly, for a guy who would show up and do video stuff, that weird retirement announcement in August was just some bizarre, it almost sounded like a freaking answering machine greeting, for God's sakes. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't even that, the audio wasn't even that great, for God's sakes. So I don't know what is that all about? There's something there that I can't quite put my finger on.
Yeah. When you have that kind of a person who's always seen and then never seen, like Richard Simmons was another one of those. Is Dave doing a Richard Simmons?
I don't know. God, you heard it here, folks. Only the DLR cast can make an analogy for Dave out of Richard Simmons.
Yeah, there's not a lot of people like that. That when Richard Simmons disappeared, he'd still been teaching an exercise class every week at his exercise studio, no matter how famous he was. He was still there. And Dave has had his reclusive years. But if you go through the Getty Images archives, you see that he did go to fashion shows.
Oh, yeah.
Hamptons things. He was out and about, even if it didn't make the media rounds. He would show up for stuff he cared about.
Yeah, he would show up at things we'd hear about. I mean, yeah, I think he does a lot more than most people realize. I think I think for press nowadays, it's if he's not generating it himself. Do you know what I mean? It's like if somebody in his camp, what camp there is, isn't sending things out to select publicists to leak out there or other people, we just might not know about it because let's face it, there's a lot of bigger celebrities than him, and for him to do the VMAs, show up at the VMAs. Well, that was kind of big news because here's one of the, most influential guys in MTV history showing up, hasn't been there in ages. And so I get that. As far as other things, I don't know. I mean, it might just not make, I don't think he's that visible, but he also, when he wants to, he can fly completely under the radar, which brings us to this week's guest.
Oh, but before we get there, can I tell you a weird secondhand Dave story someone told me?
Of course.
So, Dave, it looks like he hasn't had a steady publicist in like 15 years. It kind of looks like he goes, I want to do this interview and that one, and then I'm going to disappear again. But somebody who's absolutely credible, who's absolutely a public relations executive, told me a story in like 2010, 2011, something like that. Dave reached out because he was in the market for a publicist. And he reached out and, it looked pretty interesting. And then with PR companies, usually there's the person who runs the company, and then there's like a junior person who's kind of the day-to-day person. And that's the person you get on the phone. That's the person who handles the small details. You know what I'm talking about. The day-to-day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So Dave tries to get to know the day-to-day. It's like, so what do you like to do in your free time? And the day-to-day goes like, well, I like to go to the gym. I like to watch movies. And apparently Dave blew a gasket at it. It's like, I'm not working with a guy that goes to the gym.
What?
This was a legit story that was told to me. And it kind of relates to like a story and another anonymous thing that somebody told me, like when they were talking to him after being on a radio show of his. It's the more stories I'm hearing about Dave is just mid-sentence he can just decide he doesn't like something and leave the room. And there's just these weird things that we don't hear about. So one day I'll be able to attribute some names, but my overlying point to the whole thing is that Dave looked like he was going to get into the publicist game again in the early 2010s.
Interesting. I think maybe just for him, if there's a bunch of things he wants to do, if he doesn't, I think if you're a publicist, it's a quick retainer deal, right? It's like, we just need you for a month to advance this, and that's it, if that. And then the publicist goes, well, everything I gave to you turned down, and you wanted to call it, or you just did shit completely on your own, like calling a Vegas newspaper or whatever, talk about retirement.
Yeah, you do.
Or maybe you just didn't take the publicist's advice and said, fuck it, I'm going to do what I want to do for, ahead of these shows.
I'm not taking direction from someone who goes to the gym.
Exactly.
Whatever it is. I said this an episode or two ago, but certain people, after the way he canceled those dates with the "we were rained out," ha ha ha, that kind of thing, people who knew Dave and worked with Dave went, oh my God, what is he doing? So it's unfortunately not just us who are still scratching our heads and going, what the hell? But yes, I've interrupted you a few times, and we have an interview this week with Linda Reissman.
Yes.
Why did I say her name wrong?
I'm not sure. It's the time zone, perhaps. You're tired. You've got jet lag. I get it.
Jet lag. But Linda, if you listen to, I think, the second episode of Dave's show on K-Rock, she was in the studio because that was his actual EMT teacher, not a gimmick.
Right. So, okay. So let's set this up right. For those who remember, Dave was an EMT in the early aughts, correct? In New York City, of all places. And heretofore, I'm pretty sure this is the only person I've ever heard, and we've got it, you've got it, to talk in depth about Dave's training as an EMT, about why he wanted to do it, how he did it, his work ethic, everything that Dave talked about in this. There was no, over the time, heretofore, we only got Dave's view of it, talking about it. Here we got somebody else talking about it, basically, and basically embellishing and giving more credence and more details about all of that, in addition to what Dave has said over the years, which, has been not that substantial, but given the basics. But she really gets in depth, and she just seems like a super cool person, somebody I'd love to hang out with. But man, what a great situation she was in. And it just sounds like she really admired what Dave was doing, and he took it 100% seriously and worked his ass off.
You make a really good point there. Dave spoke a lot about being an EMT, but it was always the same three anecdotes when you think about it.
Right.
There was the one that, like, were you ever recognized while you're doing this? And then he tells some story about, I think after an Ozfest concert that in the Bronx or something like that, that the guy kind of recognized him. But you didn't know if that was really the true story, but he said that one a lot. I don't know. He would always, you could tell me if you disagree, but he would always kind of change the topic and make it about how he loves living on the Lower East Side and how eccentric it is, as opposed to saying, I did X number of runs, or these were the hours I did, or this is when I did it. Like, I never knew when he did it.
I think also the fact that, I mean, it's ironic, right? For a guy who wears the world championship belt, as far as blowing his own horn about his accomplishments, substantial as they are, and rightfully he so and should, he always pretty much downplayed. I think maybe out of respect for the gig, perhaps, and he knows how difficult and how tough it is to be an EMT. And I certainly don't think he'd ever want to try to in any way paint it as something or have it implied as something other than what it really was, especially to people he shared, a truck with, or shared going on calls with, or whatever. I mean, I really believe that. I think, it's especially after listening to this interview with Linda, he did this because he was passionate about it, and she gets into why, and for all the right reasons. This was no glamour thing. He wasn't showing up there with an advanced person trying to, all right, so when you come out of the ambulance, we want the stretcher to be on this angle so we can catch Dave. Dave, you know what I mean? None of that shit was the case. Nobody knew this was going on.
No one knew it was going on until maybe he leaked it to the press at a certain point. But pardon me, I didn't press the cough button that time. It's sort of weird because if he was doing this in, did she say 02 or 03?
I thought it was a little bit before that. I can't remember the timeline exactly. I always equate New York with your filthy little mouth from like 94 to like 2004, let's say, before everything got back and rolling with Van Halen and Ernest, which was 2007.
But he was in New York for K-Rock in 06. And
that's right. It was 05, 06, because you're correct. Yes.
So it's kind of funny if you take a step back and you think about it. If the EMT stuff, let's say 2000, 2001, 2003, sure, not that far off from No Holds Barbecue, which is the most unwoke thing.
Yeah, true.
That's like the most bizarre, politically incorrect thing I would have to say he did in his whole career. And then the EMT thing is the most like giving back, unselfish thing he ever did.
Right. At the same time, perfecting skills and doing what I think has always been his MO. And that is just a constant pursuit of not a thrill so much, but a constant pursuit of passion and to educate himself.
Yeah. So it was cool that Linda remembered dates and names of hospitals and institutions, because that corroborates what Dave is saying in true detail.
Completely. And it sounds like she still occasionally keeps in touch with him too. He's somebody who doesn't forget the people that mean a lot to him. And he still, from what she mentions, reaches out every now and then.
Yeah. So it's a totally positive Dave story. And it's a head scratcher like that. He doesn't want this good side of him out there so much.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly never put it out there in any big way. Just really those three anecdotes, more or less, that you mentioned. It's part of the Dave lore. For the most part, nobody really knows about it as far as some of the inner workings of it until now, until this interview. So kudos to you, my friend, because it's a great one.
And this is also not too far off from that Ashley Abernathy charity song that he did.
That's on Spotify. Yes. That nobody knows about.
Which he also doesn't talk about. So it's like, what kind of person doesn't talk about their good deeds ever?
I mean, yeah, I know over time he's been involved. He's definitely donated, helped some different charities and stuff.
Yes.
You heard kind of second or third hand, sometimes in the press, sometimes not, in Pasadena, different things he's done. I mean, for a guy who, his dad was a doctor. I mean, he came from, I think, from a background where he saw people give back pretty regularly. He worked in hospitals growing up. He was some sort of orderly or when he was in community college or something like that. So, I mean, he certainly didn't come from a complete ivory tower background, or was so far removed from seeing those sorts of things on an everyday basis growing up. Right. So, I mean, I think that kind of definitely informed him to do something like being an EMT.
Yeah. I really cannot think of a better analogy besides Richard Simmons with, bad guy wrestlers in professional wrestling, that they're generally the nicest people ever, but they can't put out there that they're nice people doing good deeds because it goes against the character. Well, the Diamond Dave character would never apologize for anything. The Diamond Dave character is almost like a rodeo clown. It's like, I'm here to amuse and entertain you all. So maybe it's off-brand to be saving lives and doing good deeds.
Possibly. But yet when I think, I mean, that could be it too. But when you think of all the other things that he's done outside of the rock stuff that he was really willing to talk about in such a way, especially the Aikido stuff, the martial arts, doing videos about Russ and border collie competitions, right? I mean,
yeah.
And do you remember he was doing like these, he's done so many, the tattooing, the artwork, the whatever he was doing in Japan and stuff. I mean, so but this was really, everything else maybe has been the most muted as far as the things he's talked about outside of the rock world.
Yeah, the only reason I knew about the dog training related stuff he was doing and him adopting from a Pasadena animal shelter was because somebody in the Roth Army message board heard him talking, going like, that's not Dave. Why would he be here? And he was in one of his disguises where he's got the goatee and the baseball cap. David Lee Roth doesn't have a goatee.
I don't know if that's so much a disguise so much as off-season Dave, perhaps,
Yeah. So, but how much of the things we know are just because other people were telling about his good deeds and his local stuff? So it's almost like if nobody saw this stuff and nobody spoke about stuff after they'd worked with him, we would know even less about the guy at this point.
It would all be about stuff that he wanted to be put out there, whether it's getting busted for $10 worth of Jamaican bunkweed in New York, or remember a few years ago, somebody tried breaking into his house or breaking into his yard, and he was trained a gun on him until the cops arrived. Just another page in the chapter of Dave, I guess. So, but this was a real good one because this is a time period where most people know very little about, and I think this is one of the time periods, or especially one of the outside of the rock and roll sphere things that he's done that I've always been the most curious about.
Yeah, if you think about 2000, 2001, 2002, there was internet, but there wasn't social media.
Right.
So, Dave was actually a really early internet guy. Did we ever talk about his 1998 webcasts?
Briefly, I think so. Maybe it was I can't remember, but he was in that space very early on for a minute.
Yeah. So that's like another Roth mystery for me, because he talked about in the Rogan and maybe the Maron interviews, like, I don't have a cell phone. I took the bedroom TV out of my house.
Right.
I'm off the grid. And they're like, well, what if you need somebody? Oh, I call this number. And then the car shows up. So it's like he's claiming he has no internet or no smartphone. But some of the press releases around the cancellations of the Vegas shows were like, and the following was sent to us by text message. So like, so he has a phone again. He's early on the internet, and then he quit the internet, and he's back on the internet.
Yeah, and he's talked about what he listens to on Netflix and different. I mean, so he's aware. He's not a complete Luddite. We know that much. And he was doing 2 different podcasts, for God's sakes, in the last 5, 6 years, 8 years, right? I mean, the most recent one ended right before the end of 2019, before he went on the road with Kiss.
And I was buying CDs in his backyard.
Well, that we know. Hey, he's nothing but entrepreneurial. I mean, this is a guy who was papering flyers all over the place in Pasadena and Southern California, put them under windshield wipers out, the parking lot of Los Angeles Forum when AC/DC was playing or whatever, I mean, So he's been nothing but the hustle.
Yeah. Hey, all this said, I'm still disappointed that we don't know what's going on with the guy, but he has given us a lot of entertainment, a lot of fodder, a lot of greatness. Just hope he's well. It's like the old Jewish grandmother, like, just call us once in a while.
Let us know how you're doing.
Is it so hard to do that, David?
David.
Yeah, that's kind of all I want. I don't care if he just if it's 2 sentences of like, hey, a lot of rumors about me. I'm doing fine. See you down the road. That's all I need.
Yeah.
Just give us something that says you're fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's been so cryptic and it doesn't have to be. That's the thing. But it has to be if he wants it to be that way, and apparently he's fine with it. So,
but running down the recap here, we don't know what's going on with him. We know that Sammy and Mike Anthony have their 6 or 7 shows in Vegas, which I have to say, it makes me sound like a traitor. There's a tiny chance I'm going to that.
Hey, there's no trade. You know what? It's fine. Enjoy it, man. I think it could be great.
Here's why. I was able to look at the calendar, and that same weekend of the last Sammy shows, there's a Scorpion Skid Row show in town. There's the Foreigner Residency where they're doing pretty much the whole 4 album, and there's a PI convention. Come on.
That's all you. Are you kidding me? First off, you can be there for work and business reasons.
Yes.
And tie in some really cool rock shows, of which the odds are good you're not going to see any of those guys around for 6-7 years from now.
Yeah. So, most people would go, you're either Sammy or Dave. I'm not. Hey, look, if Sammy's not doing Van Halen on the road, we've got no Van Halen. Would you rather have some Van Halen or no Van Halen?
Exactly. And I mean, Sammy's long got a good. There's so many. I'd be happy to hear some Montrose songs, some Sammy solo stuff, mix it up. I mean, he's always done cool covers. I think he's going to be great in Vegas. I mean, if he only played 3 Van Halen songs, I wouldn't be disappointed, because he's got so much other music.
Yeah, I just want to hear 2 hours of Chicken Foot myself.
Well, and Chicken Foot too.
No, that is not true. But the hotel that he's playing at, the Strat, also has the Cheap Trick residency. So that gives me hope for a lot of our favorite artists continuing, having a home, Vegas being interesting, Vegas not just being where the lounge acts go. It's interesting to see if that is just ultimately what all these artists do instead of 40-date summer tours in the future. If they can make the same amount of money playing 12 shows at one venue, and you got to go there. So I think
cruises.
And cruises. Case study.
Yeah. That and boat cruises.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of interesting boat cruises in the last couple of years. Slipknot, Megadeth, not exactly the most cruise-oriented bands, but rock is not dead. That's if you read Facebook enough, you'll see, oh, rock is dead. There's no good music. Not true.
Not true at all.
I think it'll be interesting to see how these Sammy shows go. Also,
you gotta be curious to see how they sell too.
That's what I mean by that. Right before COVID happened, he had a triple bill tour that was him, Whitesnake, and Night Ranger that didn't happen due to COVID. Would have been a hell of a tour from a entertainment level, but I couldn't have imagined that did more than 4,000 tickets a night.
Yeah, and I'm a big Night Ranger fan and a Whitesnake fan. I bought both their last records and was listening. I kid you not, I was listening to the most recent Night Ranger record today on my way home. So
still great. Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. And Cheap Trick put out a great record too. And all brings back to the point where, well, if they all can do it, why can't Dave get out there and do it? God damn it.
And most of the musicians who Dave played with are willing to join him at any given time.
Oh, of course they are.
I'm not saying Ted Templeman would come out of retirement to do a Dave album, but there's plenty of people who worked with him. I'm sure Rick Rubin would do a Dave album.
That would be a good, might be an interesting podcast episode, kind of the, dream collaborations, dream bands, right? To work with Dave, with the caveat being you can't automatically go with the Eat 'em and Smile band. They did that already. Who would you like to see Dave play with now, today?
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you correctly, no damn reason to stop this podcast because we got the fantasy booking episodes.
Yeah.
We still have to figure out who Dave's butcher was, whose dog walker was.
And we've got a lot of great interviews still to come, including this one next, ladies and gentlemen, with Linda Reissman.
Exactly. So thanks for listening, Steve. Thanks for bearing with all this and nothing but yeah.
My pleasure, man. I look forward to the next episode and the next episode of Where Will Darren Be?
Oh, man, I cannot wait to be home for a long period of time. Travel is one of those things that they tell you is amazing. And then once you're flying 5-6 hours a clip, no, it's not. No. It's such a pain in the ass so often nowadays. So, but exactly. So I will enjoy it here. Hopefully I will be unsick in the next episode. And again, millionth time, thank you to anyone who takes the time to listen.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
I discovered you because I was listening to an old episode of Dave's radio show on K-Rock, and you were in the studio as the guest on that episode. I think it was the second taping, and then I looked you up and I went, wow, that was legitimately his teacher. That was not a radio shtick kind of thing.
No, actually, I was one of the sidekicks. I was on a few episodes with them because they kind of, you know how they wanted to build like sidekicks, like Howard Stern had?
Yeah.
So I had a very good relationship and a good rapport with Dave. So his manager and the K-Rock folks felt it would be a good idea to have, the occasional guests that would come and visit, So, it was a really good experience. It was so out of my wheelhouse, but a really good experience.
So in terms of you training him, being his instructor, how exactly does this happen? Because I know that you have a rich background in not just practicing the technique of the EMT world, but training the people to do that. Is it that you're an instructor and somebody goes, you have a new student and it's Dave?
No, actually, I'll give you a little background. So for a good period of time, for almost 10 years or 9 or 10 years, I was with the New York State Department of Health Bureau of EMS. Aside from my background working 911 ambulances and teaching EMS, I was actually an instructor at the New York City EMS Academy. What happened was I had applied back in like 1994 or 1993 to become the New York State EMS inspector for New York City, and I got the job. I was the first woman in New York City ever to have that job. So that being said, back in around 2001, I had resigned from that position and gone on to a different EMS position for a period of time. And then 9/11 had hit, and I was working federally because I was on a federal response team. I did some work federally down at Ground Zero. So because of my background, what happened was one of the training institutes that was contacted by the New York State Health Department, and I was, at that time I had resigned and I was doing a different job, but I was still teaching and very active in the EMS community as a consultant and as an instructor. So training for different, helping different institutes out, being one of their senior level instructors, running programs for them as well. So the state health department was a little concerned that if Dave was in a regular classroom, it would bring the media and all that.
Right.
And they had contacted and they gave one of his assistants or his manager a couple of phone numbers to call to find an EMS training institute. And the state had, when he said, I'm going to use this institute, the state had called them and said, maybe this could be more of a private class. So because the training institute knew me and the state knew me, they recommended maybe you should use Linda. And I knew the institute anyway. I had, obviously regulated them and then done some teaching when I left the state. So they were like, would you mind, can you do this program? Because, David Lee Roth really wants to become an EMT. At first I thought it was a joke,
right,
but it really wasn't. And then I spoke to his manager and I spoke to the director of the training institute, and they're like, Dave would prefer actually a private class, and would you be interested in doing it? So I was like, why not? And after I had spoken to his manager and I spoke to Dave, I felt that the level of sincerity was really there. And after I got to know Dave, I really respected why he wanted to become an EMT. It wasn't just a fad or anything. I mean, I guess, and I'm just going to give you the background and then you can pick what you want from it. But basically, what David said to me is, hey, listen, I've been on multiple, on tours where roadies and people have been hurt, and I want to be able to help them if something happens. And I think it's important to know this skill set. I think it's important for me to really learn from the best if I can. And that kind of ties into a lot of things, because when you read about Dave's contract about the about the brown M&M, he was like, but it was really true. And it was yes. If they're not reading that, how do I know that they built the stage correctly or did the reinforcements correctly or listen to how we wanted things set up? And he said he's been in, he's seen people get hurt, due to poor stage construction and things like that. And he's the kind of guy that wants to be prepared. Also tying into his concept of, fame has just given me a passport to the world.
Yeah.
And if you think about all the things that he's done, right, the painting, learning how to do a guitar, play Spanish guitar, hiring someone from South America, one of the best premier guitarists down there to train him and have a guitar and bring him a specialized guitar. Or, I helped Dave become a pilot. Dave is a pilot. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but he's a helicopter pilot, learned from one of the guys from ESU, who had retired. It was a former police officer trained Dave. One of the companies that Dave, and now Dave's painting, and, Dave had the dogs. One thing about Dave is that he will master something, that it's not good enough just to do it and have, the patch or whatever. Dave was very committed to being an EMT. He cut his hair. He didn't want anybody to know who he was. He wore his hat. He was very low key. He went to I had him around the city in multiple different locations. I'd call the hospitals, who all knew me because I regulated them, at the time, but prior to that. And I said, listen, I need a favor. I need Dave to rotate. It's not going to be, we're going to keep it on the down low. Give me a couple of your best crews. He did his rotations there, and he really loved it. I mean, I had him at quite a few facilities around the Bronx, Manhattan, down in Brownsville, and he resuscitated folks. I mean, he was on trauma calls. We also sent him to specialized tactical training so that if he ever was on a scene with the police, he knew how to tactically operate in that type of environment. And he was gung-ho. Then he came back for a couple of refreshers. But I brought him up where I lived, up in Rockland, for his refresher classes, to be able to kind of make it. He didn't want any fanfare. He didn't want any attention about it. He didn't want to take away from the integrity of what he was doing and his partners and who he was riding with. So I had such a level of respect for him simply because this wasn't a shtick. This wasn't to get attention or media attention. It really wasn't. And he was very well respected by the EMS community and still is. I mean, people still say, have you seen Dave? Have you spoken to Dave? And, you know, like when he was coming back with Van Halen or even on it, when he was, you know, doing some of his private concerts, he would hand me a boatload of tickets and tell me, you know, get the guys down here from St. Vinny's or from Mary Immaculate or, you know, or OLM. You know, I had him at New York Presbyterian. I mean, he rode everywhere. He rode at Long Island College Hospital down in, you know, so he took care of the EMS community, you know, was very caring about, you know, how they were perceived and he was perceived and, you know, the industry was perceived. So, but that it kind of happened because I kind of knew everybody and they're like, oh, Linda can handle this.
Yeah.
And, you know, Dave wanted one of the best. Not that I don't even put it in that I'm one of the best, but I was considered and still am considered one of the best because of my regulatory background. I was a senior instructor. I was regional faculty. I taught at the EMS Academy when it first opened at Queens General Hospital back in the early 80s. So everyone knew me. I knew everyone. And the institutes were just like, yeah, this is a job for Linda. And that's how it happened.
Wow. So much to unpack right there. One of the biggest difficulties I have when it comes to researching things related to David Lee Roth is the timeline on when things happen. I don't know how up you are on his musical career the last like 10 years or so, but
I'm pretty up on it. Yeah, I'm pretty up on it.
So this new album that they've put out a few songs from, some people are saying, oh, he made that in 07. Other people go, no, he made it in 11 and 12. And then other people are like, no, it's a couple of years ago. No one knows when that was made. His EMT pursuits, around when did it start? Ballpark, was it 2002?
I'm trying to remember. Kim, the initial Dave was 2003, 2004, right? The initial EMT? I'm trying to remember. I got to remember. It was definitely after 9/11. My parents, I was working from home because I had my own business. So it had to be, I would say 2004, right? Yeah, 2004. End of 2003, 2004. And I would travel, you know, the state gave us permission to travel to his apartment. And at that time it was, I won't say exactly where it was, but it was, he loved living on the Lower East Side. Loved the vibe there. Loved being, you know, he was just a really, really, he loved the community, loved the music down there, loved, you know, the grit.
Yes.
And so I had equipment that I would bring to his apartment a couple of days a week. He would do his assignments. I mean, everything was, you know, I would do my lectures with him. He would always had his homework ready, always completed his tasks, always made his rotations. Probably, and the intelligence level and the understanding of, and, you know, it wasn't just good enough for Dave to pass the test. Dave wanted to pass really well. It wasn't good enough for Dave to know the basics. He wanted to know even more. So, you know, we kind of really beefed up the class for him because of his quest of knowledge. And I don't want to say the word perfection, but professionalism. There's just a level of professionalism that he's not going to go out there. He didn't want to go out there and embarrass himself, hurt a patient, or feel like this was a shtick, that he didn't want his partners or anyone. He made sure that, you know, that he was good. And then what I would do is I would actually bring in a couple of experts, whether it be a police officer or someone who specialized in paramedic stuff. He even learned how to help the medics. You know, like the medics are at a little level of higher. Like, you know, he learned how to set up the EKG machines, things that normally you don't teach in an EMT class. But Dave, you know, was like, I don't want to stand around with hands in my pocket and just be an observer. I want to be able to contribute, you know. And once I think everyone saw how he was proficient, you know, I mean, there's a lot of skill sets to this, right? There's patient assessment, there's bleeding control, there's learning to use a defibrillator, traction splints when someone fractures their femur, immobilization, spinal immobilization, oxygen therapy. At that time, we were just starting with EpiPens and albuterol and, you know, and some medications and nitroglycerin. And so he took it very seriously. And even in his refresher classes, he made sure he made his way up, you know, to Rockland where I was living. And we actually hit him out at the Rockland County Emergency Medical Training Center in Pomona. And that's where he did a couple of his refresher classes.
Wow. Well, over to you here. As we talked about at the top of our conversation, you were on multiple episodes of the radio show on K-Rock, which, although you're an excellent speaker and you know your stuff, that must have been a fish out of water scenario for you. Was it enjoyable, that chapter of your life?
Well, it was very unexpected, and I spoke in front of a classroom, and I knew how to do that, but it's very different learning how to. First of all, I came from Brooklyn. I have a curse mouth. I actually had a statue of the Virgin Mary in front of me because I went to Catholic school to remind me not to curse.
Right.
That was one thing. Secondly, you have to get up at 3 a.m. It was not that I wasn't used to working all hours or whatever, but I had to be up at 3 a.m. down by K-Rock early. By 10 o'clock in the morning, your day is over, but you've been up since 2 or 3. Travel, we had to prepare. At that time, there wasn't as much internet. So I had to have, magazines delivered to my house. We had to set the boards up to what he wanted to speak about, whether it was Britney Spears or this or that. It was very manual at the time. And Dave had his own concepts of how he wanted to do that. So, there were certain things that I did do. And then he had other folks come in and rotate me in and out. But for the most part, it was really to have someone around Dave that he can bounce things off of. So I did a few episodes. I did enjoy it. It's not for me personally. I wouldn't want a career in radio or even podcasting. It's just not for me. But I welcome the opportunity, and I thought it was great. And anyone who can go on the radio and do podcasts, I'm in awe of, because there's an art to that. There really is an art to that. So keeping people engaged that you're not really looking at, and keeping the conversation going and making it entertaining. So, I have a lot of respect for people who are in the industry, actually.
It sounds like that's another facet of Dave really, really doing his homework and really working hard, but at the same time kind of wanting to give the public image of that he was a slacker. Do you know what I'm saying with that? Where the hardest working guy wants to publicly seem like he's the least working guy.
Tina, I never, actually, personally, I never got that impression. I never got that impression of him. Because I was up close and personal and saw how he prepped and what his vision was for the show. And again, there was a lot of politics behind the scenes that I was around, but I keep out of, him working with, the folks at K-Rock.
Right.
I mean, and when you really think about it, right, when you think about who he replaced, Howard Stern and Robin, I mean, let's think about that. That's the iconic, probably best radio guy will be in the history of radio.
I agree.
So
with you.
in fairness to, especially the hype and how they were on and they were on regular radio for how many years, the airwaves for how many years, him and Robin, there was a big thing when they left, and the whole Sirius thing. It was a lot of shoes to fill. Other folks felt that they should have gotten the job. So, Dave was up against a lot, and I didn't feel at all slacking. I felt he was really, he really was into it. But he had his vision, and I guess sometimes things just don't work out for whatever reason when you're dealing with a corporate environment. So I would say more, Dave's not, maybe it's not that he's a slacker. He's an artist. He has his own vision. There's a corporate perspective to things, and then there's the artist's perspective. And sometimes I guess it doesn't mesh.
Right. I totally understand what you're saying. The direct example I have is I had the pleasure of seeing his Vegas shows a year and a half ago, right before COVID. Mm-hmm. And one of his famous lines in concert is, pardon my French here, but I forgot the fucking words. He yells that out once or twice every show. And there was a reviewer in the crowd for that first or second show at Vegas that won't. And do you see how under-rehearsed he is? He doesn't remember the words. Clearly, they weren't a diehard.
You know how many artists use teleprompters for the words?
Yeah.
When you're talking about having 1,000, see, it's so funny. I just got off the Melissa Etheridge cruise. And
Six Man.
Yeah, and I can tell you how many of the folks said, and I forgot the words. Let's start all over again. It happens. It happens. But you know what? They're honest. And and even Melissa said, sometimes I'm just glad I got a prompter here, with 700 songs in my repertoire. Sometimes this, it happens. So I don't think it's an unprepared thing. I just think that how many times, you forget things. You just forget things. If you do it so much, sometimes it doesn't make you remember it. Sometimes it makes you forget sometimes because you just go blank.
Sure. Well,
no, I never ever would feel he would be unprepared. Was he tired? Did he just forget the words because, the cues were different or off? Yeah, maybe. But he was honest about it.
I always thought it was shtick to make it look like he wasn't as trying as hard. But whatever it is, 2 quick questions for you, and then you're free because
Sure.
You've been so generous with this time and energy you've given me. And
no problem.
The first one is, do you have a favorite David Lee Roth album or Van Halen album?
Well, I always liked the first album. I mean, and I like all of Dave's work. I actually really liked when he did the country style music. I kind of really liked that. I guess more of a blues country type thing. I really liked that.
That was Strumming with the Devil, I think you're talking about?
Yeah. I really respected that, he went to a different genre and he challenged it. I mean, there's so many people do that, there are other artists that do that, but I felt that was very brave, true to his art, that, he wanted to do that. And I really liked some of the music a lot.
Sure. Well, the last thing is, another thing that you find with Dave is he seems to have 2 or 3 year cycles with people coming in and out of his life. It's kind of like they're his teacher or they're in his band and then they're not anymore. When was the last time that you heard from him or encountered him?
Maybe a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I think, roughly. I mean, occasionally he'd sent, during Christmas, a bottle of champagne to our house, and he gave us a piece of artwork once.
Wow.
He was, but I think Dave, don't forget, Dave was in Japan for many, he's on he was in Japan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say people cycle in and out of his life as much as he cycles into that. The past, my fame is a passport to the world, a passport to knowledge.
Yeah.
So I could, there's a possibility I may hear from Dave tomorrow. And I never thought anything that I didn't hear from Dave in 3 or 4 years. I'm sure if I picked up the phone, call his manager and said, could I have tickets, which I've done in the past, of course. So I don't feel, again, I had a different relationship with Dave in the sense that it was a very professional relationship because I was his instructor. But I also, just so that you do know, for about 1.5 years, I was his personal assistant. He liked me so much that he hired me as his personal assistant.
Oh, wow. I never heard that.
Yes. So, and he had his manager, Matt, and I would do a lot of stuff, for Dave, get him flights. Like I said, I got him, I took care of him when he wanted to become a pilot, a couple of other things that he did that he was interested in. So he actually hired me and I was on payroll. Yeah.
The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. Wow. Well, will we see you at any of the Vegas farewell shows?
I think Kim and I are going to try to fly out to one. Yeah. I happen to play poker. I love playing poker. So there's a good possibility. And I know we went down and saw Dave down when he was down in where was it? Down in Florida. He was at House of Blues, right, Kim? Hard Rock, right? That's right. That too. Yeah. Oh. So there's a good possibility. Yes. Well, and what the problem also is I am I'm still doing. I just retired from Memorial Sloan Kettering. I was doing. I was the director of emergency management and business continuity there. So I do some consulting still, even though I swore that I was going to retire full time after COVID. But I'm actually doing some consulting right now from Mount Sinai, even from North Carolina. So I think we're going to hit one show. I think we're going to fly out and try to hit one show and be there for a long weekend. And I get free rooms over at Caesars where I play poker. So, yeah, there's a good possibility you'll see me.